For those of you who are seeing me for the first time, my name is Udi Dahan. I'm I don't know what you could say, DDD, CQRS, microservices, formerly SOA recovering addict. This is the point where I say, hi Udi, we love you. That's an American thing, I guess. So I tried to come up with the most cryptic title for my talk, while using enough of the buzzwords that ultimately kind of saying, well, there's something there, domain models, yeah, that's close, and CQRS, we've heard about that, and Sagas. Who's heard of Sagas before? Okay, wow, a lot of you, good. So we're going to be coming at these concepts sort of in a roundabout way. The idea here stems from a very simple statement that has been the staple of almost all programming languages from the very early days, and that's the if statement. Now, most of us, we don't think twice about typing in those two letters, whether it's in the form of validation logic or business logic or calculation or any type of place where we need to do branching. But, the ifs go in there, and only in sort of really rare situations where we have sort of an if and then another if and then an if and another if. Okay, we'll switch to a switch case. But really beyond that, we don't spend too much time considering what are the risks around using this construct? And the reality is they're not really programming risks. They're domain logic risks, where that if statement sort of lets us off the hook fairly easily. So that's what we're going to be spending our time talking about. My hope here is that I give you some new ideas and new questions to ask your domain experts when you come back from this talk, when you come back from this conference, and hopefully that will be the kind of thing that leads you to a deeper understanding of why the domain works the way that it does, or in many cases, to uncover a lot of rich domain logic that you didn't even know needed to be taken care of. So the if statement that we use kind of has two major roles. The first one I'm going to call it if the protector. Where it's coming in there and all of the validation logic and all the constraints and making sure that strings aren't null and all that kind of stuff, this is the kind of stuff that we rely on in order to do our traditional defensive programming. And for the most part, this is how we think about the if statement. It's the thing that protects our code from all of the evils of the outside world. But I'd like you to see the other side, a different kind of if statement, if the deceiver. You might know this guy if you've seen the movie The Devil's Advocate. In it, Al Pacino portrays this partner at a very large law firm, who later on we find out is actually the devil. But he kind of insinuates his way into the protagonist's life, tricking him and laying all sorts of little traps for him to end up on a path that isn't so good for all of humanity. And I'm going to try to help you see this dark side of the if statements that we're using. And it's not going to be the kind of thing that's immediately apparent. I'm going to have to start kind of upstream in terms of a given scenario or use case or problem domain. But as we go forwards, I hope you'll see how that deceiver pops up for us. So I'm going to start with the example that if you've seen any of my talks, you know that I go on and on and on about. It's my friend, Amazon. Who's bought something online with Amazon? Everybody. Has anybody not bought something online with Amazon? Oh, we got their hands out. Okay. What's wrong with you people? So in terms of buying stuff online, we've got our search screen, which allows us to type in a couple of words, domain modeling, domain-driven design, and it finds all of the wonderful books for us about domain-driven design. And then after we see a book that we like, let's just say it's Eric's book, And you say, hey, okay, great, look at that and see that it's in stock and all that kind of stuff. And then we come along and say, all right, I want to add that to my shopping cart, right? Now, this is the point in time where we move from the query side of things, which is what we've been doing so far, right? Doing a search is a kind of query. Looking at the details of a given product is also a kind of query. What other related products there are, all of the type of information that pops up is a query. When we go to click that button, add to cart, is when we switch from the query side to the command side. So if you've heard about CQRS, that's really what we're doing here linguistically, is starting to evaluate what's the responsibility of each part, the command side and the query side. So one of the important questions to ask ourselves when dealing with any type of command is what would cause that thing to fail? Now, here I want to distinguish the technocratic contributions for failure of, well, the web server that I talked to crashed, or I couldn't connect to the database, or we got a deserialization exception. All of those technocratic reasons should be handled by some kind of infrastructure whose name rhymes with NServiceBus. Yeah. So we're not going to get into that now. We're going to focus more on the logical contributions for failure. Why might a command fail? Now, one of the answers that I get repeatedly every time that I kind of ask this question, well, why would something like this fail? I said, well, what if somebody deleted that item, right? If the item's deleted, obviously you can't add it to your cart, so that would be a logical reason for failure. I couldn't find the item in the database. Now, I want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about deletion because in all of my work with customers and developers all over the world, this example, this what if the thing was deleted, is brought up again and again as to why something would fail. So I want to spend just a minute talking about deletions. Developers end up still doing delete, delete, delete. But one of the questions that pops up is, well, if I delete a product, what about all the other things in my domain that are connected to that product? Should we cascade the delete onwards? So if I delete a product, does that mean that every single purchase for that product in all of history should also be deleted? Quick question, all right, poll again. Who has done cascade delete once in their career? Okay. Now you know where the second question is going to be. Who's done cascade delete twice in their career? Right? It's the kind of thing, you do it once, and all of a sudden you realize just how far those dominoes go, right? It's the, you go from the product to the orders, and then the orders, ultimately the customer, and then from the customer to the account rep, and from the account rep, and before you know it, half your database is gone, and Twitter is ablaze and saying, what's wrong? Don't you have backups? Have you heard that one? And you're like, yes, we've backed it up 5 different ways, but none of them can be restored. Those poor, poor guys. We have all of our stuff on GitHub, by the way. Not to say that it wouldn't happen to them, but it's one of those things that really drives the point home. You got to be careful with the deletes. So, all right, we know we don't want to cascade delete. It's really dangerous. It's definitely not the kind of thing that should be applied sort of at a raw database level without any sort of domain concerns around it. So once we start talking about delete, invariably developers start saying, well, delete is risky. Let's move to a soft delete. Who's done a soft delete before in their system? Yes, it's kind of the pendulum swinging back the other way. Delete was so traumatic that we're not willing to delete anything anymore, and then we soft delete. And also, I have a kind of theory that was probably a contributing factor to why event sourcing got so popular so quickly, because it's based on that same philosophy. It's the don't delete, don't overwrite. Don't put yourself in a position that you can't roll back from. And that's something that we all like to have a safety net. Now, in terms of that soft delete, my issue with it is that it's still very much a database up perspective. It's in that sense of, okay, we did a delete, we probably shouldn't have, let's do sort of a soft delete thing on top of it. And then that way we can unsoft delete the previous soft delete, and then we haven't lost data. But soft delete is kind of a kludge when you try to apply it across an entire system. So imagine an environment where a user has just added a new item to the product catalog. All right? So they type something in, they look at it, they're like, oh, this is a duplicate. And now they want to delete the thing that they just added. Now, of course, you say, oh, no problem, I'll do a soft delete on that. And then there's the whole, they click delete, and you're like, oh, okay, soft delete, and then you put that in sort of a special status kind of place. And they're like, no, get rid of it. And then they have to go into the soft delete area, and then they click delete, and you're like, are you sure now we're really going to delete it this time? And they're like, yes, delete. It doesn't provide for a really good user experience when you have users that are in sort of data entry mode, where they're doing a lot of, get something in, merge this, and they kind of want a sandbox in which they can work without having to worry about all of the cascade delete effects or to have to deal with soft deletes or all that kind of stuff. In essence, one of the things that I think is missing from a lot of the systems that we're building, it's not the soft delete feature, but rather that distinction between the system as a whole that all the users can operate on and a sandbox. The difference between private data and public data. Now, when we think about private data, again, it's that sort of data entry scenario, somebody that's saying, okay, I want to create a product and create another product, okay, change that, set the price, put this image, no, I don't like that image, put it in this category, put it in that category. The kind of stuff where they're kind of making a mess. For those of you who took part in Alberto's event storming session, you know what that's like, right? Sticky notes all over the place. Sometimes you got to make a mess in order to figure out what's necessary, what's essential, and to distill things down. If you haven't experienced event storming, I strongly recommend it. But a lot of times our users operate in domains where they have to go through a similar process. They kind of have to make a mess, but it would be nice if they had a little private sandbox that mess could be consolidated in, and they can put sticky notes up and throw them away without the system constantly asking them, are you sure you want to totally delete this previously soft deleted thing? It gets really annoying really quickly. So that's the private side of data that, again, I think is missing from a lot of systems, that we tend to treat data as if there was only one state. Once you create it, at that point in time, it appears for everybody else and they can do whatever they want with it. And that starts to create problems for users. So if we have this type of staging area, if we have this kind of sandbox where we allow users to create, read, update, delete, without having to worry too much about applying all of the domain logic and all of the constraints and all of the invariants and all of the important stuff that's so relevant in the public domain, it can give our users a much better experience and solves the problem for us of delete versus soft delete. And then the one final piece of the puzzle would be to include a kind of final publish step. So for those of you who have used content management systems or blogs or things of that nature, you've probably seen that button there. You write the blog post and you can save it, but it's not published yet. And then there's that final step of saying, are you ready to take your data from the private domain, where only you can see it, out into the public domain? And sometimes it's just those two little pieces of having a sandbox and having an explicit publish step that solves a lot of the problems around delete, so that we can have true deletes in private, but then the question becomes, what about the public side of things? That's where we were before. That's why we created the soft delete to begin with. So anytime you're building a type of multi-user system where you have you feel the need for a soft delete, oftentimes what you're missing is a private data sandbox that will enable your users to create, read, update, delete the data that they need, and just get on with things. Now, what do we do about the public side of things? What do we do about the product that already has been published and now is available for people to buy, and they've bought it and we have all that history? At that point in time, we need to replace soft delete with something a little bit more business-centric. So anytime you get a requirement from a domain expert saying, I want to delete this, your first question is, okay, is this sort of a private sandbox delete? In which case, absolutely, you get to delete it. Versus is this a public domain entity that can have relationships to a whole lot of other things? In which case, delete is the wrong word. Tell me why you want to delete this product. That question, the why do you want to delete, is going to give you the more meaningful business-oriented command. In which case, in our domain of retail, they can say, well, I just don't want that product to be for sale anymore. In which case, we can turn around and say, oh, okay, maybe let's not use delete. Maybe let's create an explicit command that says, mark item not for sale. So anytime you're in a public domain type of area, you get a requirement for delete, figure out why. Have the discussion, you'll uncover some sort of business meaningful command behind the scenes, and then that's going to start to lead you on a very interesting path of more domain logic that's related to that specific command, and to distinguish all sorts of additional states that can happen for your entity as a result of that. So now that we have the situation where the business has told us it's not a question of delete versus soft delete, but whether the item's for sale or not. Now we can say, great, in the add to cart command processing, we can go and implement a check. There's that if statement. If the item is still for sale, great, you can add it to your cart. But if the item's not for sale, we'll return some kind of error. So it could be as simple as returning false, it could be throwing an exception. There are all sorts of ways that we can tell the user why they can't buy that item. Now, here's that if statement that we were looking at before. All right, that's where it came from. Start with a delete, move to a more business-centric state, and now we have if the protector at play telling us, well, you can't buy that product, it's not for sale anymore. Now, the thing about that if clause is that when we get the requirement, we're like, yeah, it makes sense. A person should not be able to buy an item that's not for sale, to put it into their shopping basket. But now we need to start to look at things on a larger continuum. So not just the add to cart button by itself, but to go back a screen to the search results, right? Before we got to the point that we were going to add an item to our shopping basket, we saw the item in search results. Arguably, all of the items on the search results screen should have been for sale, right? The query should have taken into account that state the same way. So now we're in this kind of interesting situation. The user comes in, they do a search, they see a bunch of items, and they're all for sale. They click through to the next screen, they see the details of the item. It's still for sale. They go to click that button that says add to cart. All of a sudden, it's not for sale. How did that happen? Those are the questions that we need to start asking ourselves, and to realize that what we thought was if the protector in our domain logic is actually if the deceiver. Saying, pay no attention to the search screen that just 2 seconds ago the user saw that item on. Pay no attention to the fact that it used to be in a different state. Pretend like there is no such thing as history, and only what's happening right now matters. Only look at the code right in front of you. And that's where, in essence, we're making that same sin as before of the delete, of looking at things through a very narrow, data-centric, point-in-time perspective. And once we start opening up our view, and we start realizing, wait a minute, it used to be for sale, now it's not. I'm adding it to the shopping basket. Somebody else must have changed its state to being not for sale. In essence, what we have here is multiple actors working at the same time on the same record. Right? In essence, the if statement is almost hiding that kind of race condition from us. We assume that it's the kind of thing that must always be true. You might have heard the term invariant at least once or twice in this conference. The kind of thing that we assume, yeah, you should only be able to buy items that are for sale. That should always be true. But the way to evaluate that is to say, well, if the item previously was for sale, and I'm going to add it to the cart and somebody else is marking it not for sale, now that we have a race condition, we need to pick things apart a little bit more. And for those of you who've heard some of my talks or have been reading my blog, you know what my stance is on race conditions. In any race, you need to be prepared to lose. When I say you, I don't mean the person that's adding the item to the cart. I'm talking about that race condition on the other side of marking the item as not for sale. Right? Because our assumption was that when I'm going to add the item to the cart, the other user already came in and marked it as not for sale. But what happens if things get switched around? What happens if I added the item to my cart first, and then 20 milliseconds after that, the mark item not for sale got evaluated? Doesn't that mean that I now have an item that's not for sale in my cart? That is, unless we tell the other user in the back office, I'm sorry, you cannot stop selling that item. People keep putting it in their carts. Thinking, yeah, that's a pretty dumb idea, right? There was that situation with, they call them the hoverboards, those things with wheels that the teenagers ride on and almost kill themselves with. They started blowing up. No, I'm not talking about the Samsung phones, the other thing that was blowing up. It's getting really dangerous. Have you ever noticed that? All sorts of things that used to be kind of toy, fun, technology type things starting to blow up and become dangerous. Yeah. So in any case, we wouldn't want there to be a situation where we discover an item is blowing up and it's injuring people. They keep buying it. We say, stop selling this thing. We say, sorry, people keep wanting to buy more and more of it. In other words, the mark item is not for sale command should be successful in any case, regardless of how many carts that item already exists in. So when we have this race condition where we can lose, in essence, it means the fact that we had the if statement in there doesn't really help. We can still end up with carts that have items that aren't for sale in them. And that's the thing that we need to take away from this if statement, is that we think because we put the if statement in our domain logic, because we use the magical incantation called invariant, that somehow that would automatically apply and be true across this, what I call, collaborative domain. A collaborative domain is one in which you have multiple actors that are operating on the same data in parallel. And again, a bunch of you have heard me say this before. If you're in a collaborative domain, you need to start thinking CQRS. But collaborative domains, they don't always sort of jump out at you right in your face as, oh yeah, this is a collaborative domain. Most people would have thought, what do you mean? I'm going on Amazon, I'm putting stuff in my shopping basket. There's no collaboration there. A lot of collaboration isn't the kind of thing that's immediately visible at the top level of your domain. But if you have an if statement, that means that the state can be set by some other actor. That means you have other actors that can and will be operating on the same data at the same time as other actors are. And in that case, you need to start thinking much more seriously about the command processing. Now, I have a short saying about how to apply CQRS into these collaborative domains. Try to keep things as simple and as distilled as possible. Commands don't fail. If you're in a collaborative domain, you need to figure out a way to design your solution so that almost never will a command fail. If a command has made its way to the server and it's gone through all of the necessary preliminary validation, if it's hitting your domain, the command should be successful. So all of the statements of, but what if the item's not for sale anymore? It's, well, that could happen 20 milliseconds after your command was successful, so you need to handle it. Handling it does not mean, how do I prevent the command from succeeding? Handling it is saying, given the fact that I need to be prepared to lose the race condition every single time, how can I still fulfill the overall business objective that was originally implemented with that if? And usually that means going beyond the boundaries of just that command processing and looking more holistically at what's happening in the domain. In many ways, what comes out of this saying commands don't fail means you're getting rid of the if statement. It means that you're going to have to figure out other ways to adapt the behavior of the business in order to do what the if statement tried to do in the beginning. So sometimes it can feel a little bit weird to say, well, if I'm not going to be checking if the item's for sale, then what am I going to be doing in its place and when? So the result of saying commands don't fail means, all right, we're not going to be putting the if statement in there. That means we need to start finding which other use cases need to change. I'm going to say that again. Making commands not fail in one use case, or one page, or one command, often requires us to make changes to other commands or to other queries in our domain, because all of those things are linked together as far as the end user can see. So a lot of times when you start going down this path, it can feel somewhat, I don't know, uncomfortable. Like, you know, I don't think the human body was meant to do that. And sometimes it can kind of feel that way when you're having these conversations with domain experts. They're like, couldn't you just put another if statement in there? Like, well, okay, so I get it. You don't want to kind of twist your business around. All right, so we'll check if the item's not for sale when you add it to the cart. But because you can lose that race, what we'll do is when the user clicks the button proceed to checkout, then we'll check it again, right? But there's another race that happens when the user goes to click the Proceed to Checkout button, because at exactly that same time, the other user could be marking the item as not for sale. All right. Well, we'll go to the final step where the user clicks Place Your Order, right? Sort of the final step. And in there, we'll go through the shopping basket and we'll check, are all of the items still for sale? And then we can still lose the race again, because 20 milliseconds after that, the items will be marked as not for sale. So it doesn't really matter. You can take that same if statement and you're going sort of button by button by button, saying, I'll check it here, and if that doesn't work, I'll check it over there, and if that doesn't work, I'll check it somewhere else. All so that I can sort of keep doing things the traditional way. But it doesn't really work. It's not bulletproof. It's the kind of thing that I want you to understand. It's not an invariant because of this collaborative domain. So the very act of us saying, I'm going to try to invoke the same rule at multiple stages of the process should already start giving you an inkling that the way that we're going to have to address this is through some kind of long-running process. So this whole, hey, we need to make the business a little bit more relaxed and limber and able to contort itself in all sorts of weird and wonderful ways, that leads us to eventual consistency. And my guess is all of you that have heard about CQRS have heard about eventual consistency. But the issue at hand here is not the eventual consistency of the read model. It's not the fact that we're publishing events from these commands and then we have an event handler which is doing some sort of denormalization and putting that into a read model. That's technical eventual consistency. The problem that we have here is the business-oriented eventual consistency. It's the how do we handle this situation of people buying stuff that's not for sale, knowing that, okay, we can't enforce that in the millisecond, so we need to do something a little bit broader and longer term. So here's an idea. Given that the system needs to be prepared to lose these race conditions every single time, maybe we don't need to check so much, but we can leverage some other, maybe let's not call it a feature. As an end user that's buying stuff on Amazon, you might not view this as a feature, but let's call it a behavior of the system. That shopping carts time out. People stop their purchasing session. So if somebody puts something in their shopping basket that we just saw on the search results screen is for sale, then we can say, look, as long as your shopping cart is active, you can continue on and place your order and all that's fine. But if you don't complete your order, if your shopping basket times out, now what we've done is we're no longer in a collaborative domain anymore. That user number one who is adding item to their cart is now gone. Collaboration over. And now we have the ability to do something with all of those shopping baskets that are in an inactive state. So you might have noticed, for those of you who've used Amazon, for those of you that haven't, get with the program already, that sometimes if you have items left in your shopping basket and you come back to the website a day later, a week later, a month later, it'll have this message on there. It'll say, important messages about items in your cart. Who's seen that message before in the system? Yeah, okay, a bunch of hands have gone up. For those of you that haven't, you're probably the kinds of people that use the wish list feature properly, right? The rest of us can't be bothered. The shopping basket is our wish list, and then there's that nice feature, it's save for later, right? So important messages about your shopping basket, usually it's telling us the price of the item has changed. but also it's a great mechanism for us to, in essence, tell the user, we fiddled with your shopping basket while you weren't here, just to let you know. So if an item was not for sale, then we could remove it from their shopping basket once the shopping basket became idle. So I hope you're starting to notice this type of long-running process that's beginning to manifest itself here. There's the first trigger where the user is saying, I'd like for us to stop selling this item. And then there's this sort of gradual percolation of shopping carts. First of all the ones that are currently idle, we can immediately eject the items from those. But every other shopping basket that becomes idle, we'd want to verify. Is that item in there? And then remove it. So in essence, this item is not for sale is not just a single action where we go into a database and set a Boolean flag to true, and that's it. And it's not sufficient of what we did before of verifying add to cart or proceed to checkout. But rather, this process happens behind the scenes in many cases when the users aren't there, when they're not really looking. And it's this eventually consistent state that eventually all of the shopping baskets, either they buy that item and then the item is shipped and we're done, or the shopping baskets become inactive and then the item gets ejected. In essence, the end result of this is that what started off as a very simple if statement in one part of our domain has turned into a longer running process. And I'd like you to start thinking about all the other if statements that you have in your domain logic. Whether it's on a Boolean state, like an is for sale, is not for sale. Whether it's an enumerated value, we're saying is it in state number 1, state number 2, state number 3. Whether it's a number, where it's saying is this number greater than X or less than Y or things like that. Every single piece of data in your domain logic that you are using as a part of an if statement, I want you to ask yourself, what other actor in the system could have invoked something to change this state? And once you are able to identify that, then you've uncovered some of the elements of collaboration that were hiding in your domain. And once you're there, once you have those if statements, once you've identified those commands, once you can see the collaboration happening, then start looking for long-running processes. And it's kind of dangerous because once you start looking, you start finding more and more of them. And then you're at risk to kind of move into the, oh my God, there are long-running processes everywhere. Like you see an if statement, oh my God, another long-running process. The concern is that in many cases that we actually go too far and say, well, everything is going to be a long-running process, and it becomes yet another silver bullet. All right, so I want you to be careful in going down this path. Right now, most of the DDD community is way on one side of the pendulum of thinking if statements and invariants in my domain model are good and normal and proper, and that's just fine. On the other side of the spectrum is the domain model is all long-running processes, and all of the if statements are happening in that context, and there's no longer any of that sort of static point-in-time state. Everything gets modeled as long-running processes. And the best situation is somewhere in the middle. As any consultant will tell you, it depends, right? Any consultants in the room? Yes? It's our favorite saying. Someone says, so should I do X or Y? And we kind of sit there and go, And the more we get paid, the longer we can draw out the right? If you're not paid very much, like, it depends. If you've been doing this for a while, you can kind of And people will wait, right? It's crazy. It's fun. I got to tell you, I've been doing this. If you haven't, consultants, you got to try it, just to kind of see how far you can go before people kind of, it depends, right? And you say, well, just kind of draw them out. At the end, you say, no, actually, in this case, it is abundantly clear that we should use a long-running. Screw with their minds a little bit. Keep them guessing. But the reality is, and I've been doing this domain modeling thing for quite some time, that when you start looking beyond the if statements, once you start analyzing and asking these questions, and you will need a real domain expert. It's the kind of business analyst that parrots the things that they heard from the real domain experts, not good enough. You need to have someone who can actually make decisions and speak knowledgeably about the domain. Just a small note, sometimes people think, can I get access to the real domain expert to get answers to these questions? That's a vice president in charge of whatever in the company. I can't get access to their time. Sometimes the best domain expert I found in the company is the mainframe programmer that they don't let out of the basement. If there's a meeting going on and you'll see all of these kind of really highly paid important people arguing with each other about the business does this and the business shouldn't do that, and you bring the mainframe programmer in the room, kind of listens to all that, says, but it doesn't work like any of you said. This is what it actually does. Here, I'll show you the COBOL that does it. And they're like, no, it's okay. I don't need to see the COBOL. I trust you. Sometimes that's your domain expert. It's that person that has the entire history of the company in their head, how it worked, how it changed, all that kind of stuff. In the time that they were there, the organization changed 3 CEOs, 15 senior vice presidents, and 100 directors. They have the organizational knowledge. So sometimes when you're looking for who can I ask about this stuff, sometimes it's that person in IT that is kind of overlooked by everybody else because they're still writing COBOL, poor soul. Not like the rest of us that are doing Node or Go or Haskell or .NET Core or whatever the new hip technology that everybody wants to talk about. Look for the answers there. You'll find a lot of them. And as you uncover more and more of these long-running processes, the trick or the challenge is not to make them too big. Now, this is something I don't have the time to get into in the course of this talk, but I do spend a great deal of my time talking about service boundaries and bounded contexts and things of that nature. That is the kind of thing that you should keep an eye out on. That when you're building these long-running processes, that you don't build them to run marathons. Right? You don't need the kind of long-running process that starts with, well, the user signed up in my system, and then they clicked an item, and then they added something to their shopping basket, and then they bought something, and then we shipped it, and then they canceled their order. If you have too many and-thens in your business process, you're going too far, too long. You need to slice that up into different bounded contexts. So when looking to model your long-running processes, understand that's going to happen within a specific subdomain of the problem, within a specific bounded context. And getting those boundaries right is really hard, but it is super important. So for those of you that want to learn more about, first of all, how to build these types of long-running processes, yes, I am somewhat biased towards a specific implementation technology. Part of the reason why I created a stack like NServiceBus was that I ended up having to build long-running processes over and over again, and I found out that there's a whole lot of repetitive grunt work in terms of handling concurrency and handling retries and handling all of the types of scenarios of, well, what happens if you have two instances of the same long-running process that are trying to start at the same time? How do you get them to sort of merge back in together? These were the types of technical problems that I didn't want to have to deal with every single time I was doing domain analysis. So I went and built something like this. So in NServiceBus, the feature is called Sagas, which I think is a much shorter name than long-running process, every single time to say that. And it does a pretty good job of illustrating what the idea is. For those of you who are on .NET, go to town, play with it, see what you think. For those of you that aren't on .NET, well, now you have a reason to come back. So if you want to learn more about how to design these type of long-running domain models, how to take an if statement and extract out something that looks like a long-running process, and to see how that can be event-driven, we have a bunch of videos available online. You just need to go to this URL, go.particular.net/dddeu, and you'll be able to get some videos where I talk more and give more examples, also from this retail domain that hopefully a lot of you are already familiar with, of showing how something starts as a very simple if statement and how that turns into a multi-message, sometimes a multi-actor type of correlated business process. So if you want to hear more about that kind of stuff, take a look at that. For those of you that are on the .NET stack, you'll see how it gets implemented with Sagas and NServiceBus. And with that, thank you all very much and have a great rest of your conference.